Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Make Life Less Taxing podcast, the show where we uncover what really creates freedom in life and business, and we'll explore stories of those who've learned how to build wealth with purpose.
Welcome back to the Make Life Less Taxing podcast. Today, I'm joined by Steve Smith, a financial educator with a refreshing approach to money, helping everyday Americans reclaim control of their financial future with clarity, simplicity, and purpose. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, Steve, start us off with how did you get started? Or actually, you know what? First, tell us a little bit more about yourself and the kind of work that you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was there until my early 20s. And then I transferred to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah to finish my bachelor's degree. Met my wife, and we spent about 21 years in Utah. Most of my family still lives out there. And then we spent 8 years, starting in 2016. We went out to Southern Oregon. And now I've been here in Houston, Texas for almost a year. But the way I kind of started, we were living about 35 miles south of Salt Lake City, Utah, and I was working for a marketing company that was kind of having some issues, and my wife saw an advertisement for this company that was brand new to Salt Lake City, called DLJ, Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, and they were opening an online brokerage, service call center in Salt Lake City. And so they were going to hire about 600 people.
Wow.
And that year, the dot-com bubble burst. And so we maxed out at about 93 people. And it was a really kind of an interesting time as online brokers just got gobbled up by each other. There were a lot of mergers, and a year after I got hired there, I got my Series 7 and 63 licenses, and about a year later, DLJ sold us off to Credit Suisse First Boston. They sold us off about a year later to Harris Bank, that was owned by TD out of Canada.
Yeah.
And a couple of years later, E-Trade bought us. And so we kind of did this crazy thing of always, oh, great, it's another year. Here's another HR policy. Here's another, onboarding, all of this kind of thing. But it was there that, through getting licensed, that I got a huge education, in finance, because the Series 7 is so broad, and it allows you to do so much in financial services. And so we were working in a call center where we would talk to people from all over the country. So when I first started there, I couldn't really articulate, what a mutual fund was. I kind of knew, but I couldn't really explain it clearly and properly. And so through the 3 months of training, as we were preparing to take our Series 7 exam, I learned mutual funds, bonds, municipal bonds, margin, options, all of these different topics. And even though we didn't use all of those on a daily basis, it was still industry, regulation for us to learn all of that. And so that's how I got kind of the big boost and starting, there. And then over the years, I've worked for some other companies, publicly traded finance companies, other insurance companies, and just trying to continue to learn, along the way, because trends change, markets change, products change. Things are, there's a lot better products now than there were 5, 10 years ago. And you're able to do things, and there's just kind of new products that have kind of come in the market over the last 25 years that, allow you to do a lot of things that we couldn't do in the beginning. And so that's kind of how I got started, almost by accident. In fact, the application was so long because we had to do the background checks and all of that. We had to account for like a 10-year work history and addresses and all that. And I almost got up and left. I kind of thought to myself, do I really want to dig through this whole thing? Thankfully, I stuck around. I'm glad I did, but um, that's kind of how I got into finance, almost accidentally. Um, and it's just kind of been, the thing that has sustained us in different um, parts, in different capacities over all those years.
Well, I mean, from the perspective, you seems like you've, I want to say, seen a lot of the world, but you've seen a lot of the financial world with working with the different companies, and I can identify
Right,
with it. I've started with one company that was bought over by somebody else, and
right,
it's kind of like,
right.
man, it's a whole brand new culture, and you never shed the identity. You're always the previous company's person, and
Yes,
you kind of never assimilate into that, right? So if you had more than one, it just kind of gets really, really awkward. And I'm
yes,
sure
right,
that when you started in kind of this career, you've kind of never imagined the path that you've gone on and where you are right now. So I
right.
take it now you're focusing more on that education a little bit more. So let's expand a little bit more on
Right.
that, like specifically right now what you're doing. So I mean, you've
Yeah,
got all of the investments and everything, but what is it that you do now?
right. So a lot of other companies I've worked at or been familiar, everyone kind of has their strategy or kind of their way of doing things.
Hmm.
And at times I have not been able to kind of have discussions that I think have been important to have with clients because that was not within the scope of what a company did. And so to me, as I kind of went through different companies, and like you're saying, every time there was a buyout or we merged, everything's different. Websites are different, processes, everything's different. And the more and sometimes you kind of jump on a flavor of the day with the company, right? They want you to go kind of focus on this thing. And then after a while, it's over here and you're kind of jumping around. And I felt like I wanted to get down to everything that a potential client may need, even if it wasn't things that I do. So if someone needed a trust, I could try to help find them, or they would find someone to set up a trust. But I was able to kind of talk to them about how that would benefit them, and then we'd seek a professional to find out if that was the right move and what type. But a lot of times in other firms, we didn't have conversations like that, or we didn't have conversations about life insurance or business commercial insurance if they were business owners. And to me, that's really important, is to help
Yeah.
people understand or get them in touch with professionals that would fill in some of those other gaps, even if I don't do them. And so for me, kind of taking that educational approach, teaching people what some of these things are, why it should be important to them, but also just teaching people how money works, because most people don't know the basics of finance because we don't teach it. There's no consistent platform in the United States, right? Even though we had a federal board of education, every state has a state board of education, but there's no common curriculum. In my opinion, if it were up to me, I think, freshmen or, grade nine, as you guys say up in Canada, right? I think freshmen, I think seniors should have to at least take a semester class in all things finance. And to me, that would be how a credit card works, how a car loan works, mortgages, what principal, interest, taxes, insurance mean, how those work. Just things about compound interest and dollar cost averaging, time value of money. There's so many things that aren't maybe directly related to like your retirement planning per se, but they're things that affect your daily life of how money works. And it's hard to watch, a TikTok clip that just gives you this thing and throws it at you like, oh, this is the thing, without context, without, is that appropriate for you? How does that fit in with everything else? And so for me, I like, I've always liked public speaking. I like, my kids, it drives them nuts. We'll be at the grocery store and I can have a conversation with the person behind me for 20 minutes and they're ready to go home and, do whatever. And so I was really shy as a kid. So this is kind of a big change as I got in, to being an adult. But there's not a lot of reliable sources. And if you just go do a Google search for one term or one thing in finance, it's hard to put it in context, and it's hard to find out if that's what you should do, if there should be other things that go with it. And I just feel like a lot of people aren't getting that help anywhere.
Yeah.
And
No,
so
you
to
bring
me, it's the teaching.
really great points. And one of the thing is, one of the reasons why I got out of the industry is because I start to realize after 20 years in the industry that they were not really educating me to help people. They were educating me how to sell their products. And I'm like, hang on,
Right.
that's not what I wanted. And when it comes down
Yeah.
to that basic financial education, I'm 100% on that with you because yeah, there should be some basics, and finances has gotten a lot more complicated
Yes.
in certain aspect. There are things that are a little bit simpler. I mean, listen, I went to the store. I wanted to go and pay my credit card with cash, and they said, "No, we don't take cash anymore. You can pay it with your
Yes.
debit card." And I'm like, "Okay, all right, I get it." You know, so there are all of these
Yes.
changes that are
Well,
happening, and we got to go and stay on top of it. But having basic financial
yeah.
education is so important. So listen, with all of this work that you were doing, what's been really kind of exciting or lighting you up recently in the business that you're doing?
I think a lot of it is just the constant growth. When I graduated college back in the mid 90s, my dad gave me some cassette tapes because, that's what we have. So maybe you need to have a podcast to explain to viewers what a cassette tape is. But he gave me these cassette tapes of Tony Robbins. And so I listened to some of them, and a couple of things, stuck out, stories that I remembered years and years later. And in 2020, we were living in Southern Oregon. I was all set to go to my first Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within. It was going to be in San Jose, California. We were all ready to go. It was March 2020, and then COVID hit and it locked everything down. So he ended up being able to set it up through Zoom and do it virtually. And so it was kind of cool because I got to do all this, and then I could run down the hall and use the restroom, run to the kitchen, fill up my water bottle, and while I'm still hearing everything. And a lot of stuff started coming out of that. And one of the big things I took away from that first Tony Robbins event was that life happens for us, not to us. And that really struck a nerve with me because of the story I had told myself about some, prior struggles and failures that I had and that kind of thing. And 3 weeks later, we had a massive house fire and
Oh wow.
destroyed our home. And we lived in a community where a volunteer firefighter, volunteers came and helped put the fire out, and no one was hurt. All the animals were fine. Firefighters were fine. House was just trash. And I locked the front door and I walked out, because this was about 6 p.m. on a Friday night.
Oh wow.
And I told my wife, life happens for us, not to us. And I feel like if that house fire had happened 3 weeks before the Tony Robbins event, my reaction, frankly, would have been quite different because I didn't have that, that mindset. And
Yeah.
so that was really kind of the beginning of me really pursuing, continuously personal development, reading more business books and things like that, to where I started getting into atomic habits,
Mhm.
different things like that. 10x is easier than 2x, who, not how. And so for me, a lot of that is I love the business development aspect, the personal development of I am completely autonomous to read what books I want, to do the things that I think will make me better and
Yeah.
then help my clients and, my prospects. Whereas, kind of going back to that flavor of the month thing, or, you don't you don't get to read, your book on company time or whatever. You go mess with that stuff later. And in some of the other companies I worked with, it was kind of a give us your money. We're going to go we're going to go invest it for you. We're not going to explain to you what we're doing or why. You go sit down at the little kid table at Thanksgiving and let the adults talk. And I really didn't like that. And part
Yeah.
of, me continuing as I continue to grow, that makes me better for my clients in helping them, in understanding them, in learning to communicate better. But I also want them to understand why we propose things. I don't
Yeah.
want them to just take it on faith. I want them to have a basis through our education to then say, you know what, here's a potential option. And now they can understand why we do that based on the education that we've provided to them. So I love the constant learning and growth. And, I've got a list of books, the next one, the next one, the next one. And I just want to keep being a better version of me so that I can show up for the people
Yeah.
around me, whether that's my clients, my family, my friends, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, you bring a great point, and I love Tony Robbins. I love the quote that you mentioned. One of my coaches, he takes it a little bit higher as far as I'm concerned. He says, "Listen, Daniel, life is always working for you. It's
Yes.
either working for you or it's working on you until it can work for you. So
Yeah.
at the end, it's
That's
always
a
your
great
fault. It
point.
doesn't matter what happens, right? And again, I think you
Right.
understand understand that,
Yeah.
and what you mentioned with your house. Wow, that's quite a an experience to go through, and to be able to go and handle it. It just came in the right time.
Well, and it's one of those things where I've kept a daily journal for over 34 and a half
Oh
years. I
wow,
have not missed a
good
day.
for you.
I'm currently writing in journal 102, and thankfully, those journals were not damaged in the
Oh,
fire. They were on the other side of a wall about 6 feet away from where the fire originated, but thankfully, they were spared. But several years before, my mom had taken all of our baby pictures. So I'm the oldest of 7 kids, and so she gave all of us all of our pictures as babies, as kids
oh,
growing up, and mine melted into a brick, and I lost all my pictures. And taking things like that, or my wife's grandmother's heirloom rocking chair that was
yeah,
just charred,
that's
and throwing
that's
stuff
tough.
like that in a dumpster. As luck would have it, I guess, I don't know, a month later, we had a 130,000 acre forest fire that almost came and burned the rest of our house down. And so, I was in a position to help these wildfire survivors because some of them lost everything.
Yeah.
And it was a really good lesson in sometimes the hardships we go through
Oh,
are to allow us to feel empathy for other people, because sometimes sympathy is just not enough, right?
yeah.
And so it's just one of those things where, yeah, I didn't know anyone ever in my life that had experienced a house fire. And then we started hearing about a few people. We had one 30 years ago, we had one 20 years ago, whatever. But then again, like you're saying, life works for you.
Yeah.
You know, it's working for me or on me and not against me.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, those are great stories. And again, all the adversities we go through actually shape us who we are. And, when somebody asks me, I always said, listen, my life is perfect. It always has been perfect. Why? Because it happened to me. It was my life. I can't go back and
Yeah,
change anything. I mean, I can change moving forward. Going
right.
backwards, no, it was perfect because it happened the way it was supposed to happen because it made me
Yeah,
the person that I'm at. you know, am I able to stay that positive all the time? No, it does get tough, but it certainly helps in a perspective of,
Yeah.
everything that's going on. So
Well,
that's
and I
great to hear.
think too, that was a good lesson after maybe doing my second Tony Robbins event was, he's really big on changing your state, right? You're down, you're whatever,
Yeah.
make your move, change your state, change your headspace. And I agree with that, but there's also times when, you have to mourn, there's loss, there's
Yes.
whatever, I had one of my cousins recently lost his 16-year-old son in an
Mm,
accident a couple months ago. And you have to grieve some things like that, right? Sometimes there's just stuff, but you don't stay there, right? You don't
yeah.
stay in the emotional dumpster. You process it and you move on. If it's just, oh, this appointment canceled on me, or this thing didn't work out, or I got a flat tire, I'm much better at bouncing out of that quickly
Yeah.
than when something might ruin my entire day in the past or a couple of days.
Yeah.
And so, it, like you're saying, it does help process. And when you're trying to help people, when you're, independent, you're out on your own and you're kind of an entrepreneur doing things like that, you've got to process out of that stuff. Sometimes I'm a little slow and I'm like, all right, Steve, come on, get out of it. You know better.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things. Again, the better you can be, the more valuable and more resourceful you become to those
Yeah.
around you.
Yeah, no, 100%. Listen, when you become an entrepreneur or a business owner, we are the crazy ones, and often we think that we have to kind of do everything on our own, and nobody really
Right.
understands us. I mean, from the entrepreneur perspective, I'm the only one that kind of has I call it a job where, the paycheck's not guaranteed every 2 weeks or a week,
Right.
and most people like my
Right.
family going like, how can you live like that? So I think it's a little bit, a
Yeah.
little bit harder when you bring that out.
And it definitely is. And there is definitely that lack of a safety net, right? Like
Yeah.
you're in danger of falling off the tightrope and there's not a net under you.
Yeah.
But I've also gotten to the point where when I lived in Southern Oregon, I worked in our town, but we lived about half an hour out in the country. And I've got two girls and then two
Mm.
boys. And I missed a lot of my boys' sports because I couldn't just leave the office to go watch their game at 3 o'clock and then go back and be gone for 2, 3 hours. And that bothered me.
Yeah.
I just now I've got grandkid number 6 on the way. I've
Oh,
got a couple of them
congratulations.
here in Houston.
Yeah.
I've got 3, 4 on the way in Utah, and I don't want someone telling me that I can't go somewhere on vacation or I can't stop and take a break to take my
Yeah.
grandson on a bike ride and that kind of thing. And so there is definitely that trade-off and, trying to do the things that need to be done, but enjoy your life along the
Yeah.
way, right? There's two things that really kind of sharpen my focus when it comes to how people, you know, plan for retirement and that kind of thing. So my grandparents did a Mediterranean cruise. They
Mm.
both passed many years ago, but they did a Mediterranean cruise and they went to Venice, Italy. I've had the opportunity to be in Venice, Italy many times. And my grandparents, they weren't great health. They were older. My grandpa was overweight. He had had a massive heart attack. And so I know when they went to Italy, to Venice, they kind of walked around Piazza San Marco and they saw the things that you might see in The Italian Job with Mark Wahlberg or Casino Royale,
Yeah.
with Daniel Craig. That stuff that you see right there. Um, I know that's kind of what they saw. And to me, the thing that I loved so much was wandering the back streets and getting lost and being young and healthy and being able to walk for miles. And so when you think about sometimes people think when I retire, I'm going to go do all these things. That's when my life's going to start. That's when I go travel. That's when I go do things. But you don't know what your health might be. You don't know if your partner will be there. You don't know what kind of challenges you may have or something else going on with family to say that, I'm going to wait and then start living my life. And we also had some friends in Oregon where he was a school teacher, she taught preschool, and he had this whole plan of, we're saving until we get to retirement, and then we're going to go do some volunteer service, and then we're coming back because of a social security requirement, whatever. And when, they came back after kind of doing this, the wife just said, all I wanted to do was go on one cruise.
Hmm.
And we didn't go on one cruise, And I look at that and I think we can't, just keep putting things off. That is the worst thing that we can do, because at some point you will hit the point of no return and you're not going to be able to undo the damage of not planning. And just hoping for the best is not a strategy. But at the same time, when I look at how stressed out I was, raising my kids in my late 20s, 30s. And I feel like I was, a pretty good dad, but, I could have been much better.
Yeah.
And so I'm more intentional with my grandkids as I try to, as I teach them to ride their bikes, as I teach them, to do things that scare them, kind of thing. And so I think it's one of those things where we need to be planning things along the way that we're able to do, and then plan some things in retirement, and make a plan that, because you just don't know. I lost one of my best friends 14, 15 years ago, and he was younger than me, and his heart just stopped. He was 35. I saw him on a Thursday night. Monday morning, he was gone. And it's just one of those things where you go, holy cow, that guy's younger than me. And I saw him almost daily for 10 years when we worked together. And so, sometimes it seems like people aren't living lives anymore, right? We're just kind of robotic.
They kind of plug into the matrix, right? And they're kind of
Right,
doing
and
that. So
we're kind of we're getting more and more disconnected from people. You go to a restaurant, everyone's on their cell phone. You're on a bus or any whatever it is, everyone's that. I just did it was a 2.5 mile muddy dash, just run through mud and water and obstacle courses. And, people are sitting there live streaming on Facebook. I'm like, get out of the way and go up the rock climbing wall. Like, come on, experience it, like, instead of this stuff that we're doing. And so technology's been great for how it's allowed everything in the markets, in the last 25 years, the internet, online trading, faster execution. There's no more stock certificates like we had back in the day that would have to transfer from firm to firm and those kinds of things. But it's also disconnecting us as people. And I think that's one of the things I really enjoy as well, is getting to connect with people and get to know them.
Yeah. There is a line on your profile, and you maybe kind of mentioned on that, but I want to go a little bit deeper into it. The future will not be as forgiving if you don't take control of your financial story. What's the real story behind this? I mean, you kind of touched on that, I think, a little bit. Is there a little bit more? Where did that start?
I think it's just, I feel like a lot of people don't know what to do, and so they don't take any action. They think that maybe they'll get more information, maybe something will come along, but a lot of that is, you've got to take action yourself. We have to make stuff work. When we look at, like, we can't really plan on the government, bailing us out, taking care of everything. In the United States, when Social Security was instituted, people had a really short lifespan after they retired. And so it was this little kind of stopgap, and you would most likely die, and that was kind of it. And now we're living for decades in retirement, and everything across the board is so much more expensive. Housing and food and gas prices and those kinds of things. And it's just you got to get with someone and work with a professional. And a lot of times you may have to find a person that's a right fit. Clearly I'm not the right fit for everybody. No one's the right fit for everybody.
Yeah.
But to just try to find someone that can help you make a plan and take the time to sit down with you and find out what is really important to you, what your goals are, what keeps you up at night, what level of knowledge you have on things, and try to help you to get there, because it's very difficult to do it alone. I feel like I'm good at what I do, but there's a lot of stuff that I am not good at. I don't understand how a motor works in a car. I kind of get it,
You just put the key in and you start it
but
up
I'm
and it
not
goes, man.
good
That's
at
all I need to know.
I know,
Just like with
and
TV,
I'm
I
not
turn on
good
the
at
button.
diagnosing some of those problems, right? I'm not good at diagnosing, some of the problems or things
Yeah.
like that. And, I don't know the engineering principles to build a bridge, even though I love, architecture and bridges. I love to see that kind of thing. But I think a lot of that is just to, find someone that connects with you and will help you get there. Like I mentioned the audio book that I'm listening to right now, Who Not How.
Mm.
And it's hard to get somewhere. Most of us probably have a favorite sport that we watch, and most of them are team sports, right?
Yeah.
And you can't get to your goal typically,
Yeah.
without other people
Yeah.
helping you, other team members.
Yeah.
I can't do everything for clients as
Listen, life,
well.
life and business is a team sport. I've never
It
met a
is.
person that's self-made because you just ask, hold on, did somebody like you made those shoes? Oh, you made the shirt?
Right.
You made like
Right.
no, So
Right.
you got a
And a
great
lot
point.
of times too, it's someone might have, because you look at all these companies that we're familiar with, that we would say are household names, right? It might be Microsoft, it might be
Mm.
Nike, Walmart, whatever. And it started with a vision, it started with a dream, but certain things had to happen and certain people had to be in place. You know, Bill Gates could not have coded everything that Microsoft has ever done through all the years, right? I mean, it's
No.
just not possible. He coded in the beginning. And I loved Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell's case study, on
Yeah.
him. But he couldn't keep doing that forever, right? And he couldn't code Internet Explorer 1 through whatever number we're on, by himself. It takes teams of architects and engineers to do things. Every state I've lived in seems like they're constantly under construction. Freeways always have thousands of orange cones up and all of that, right? But you can't go do big projects like that without a lot of people and their expertise in doing something. And so I
Yeah.
think that's
And
an
having a
important,
plan, actually
and
knowing
having
what you're
a
building and
plan.
having an end. Even though, as you mentioned, construction on roads sometimes feel like, is there an end date on this? Because as soon as they finish something,
They
it's kind of
start
the
again.
San Francisco Bridge. I heard that when
Yeah.
when they go across, one way, it takes them a year, and then they go back because by the
Yeah,
time they
it
make it
takes
to the other
forever to
side,
paint that thing. Yeah.
yeah. So it never stops. So who
Yeah.
are the type of people that you actually work with the most right now? Like who are kind of your ideal clients?
A lot are business owners.
Uh,
As I'm working with a lot of bookkeepers, one of the things, and I kind of stumbled into this, and I think sometimes this happens to us, but when I moved to Houston about 11 months ago, my wife got promoted, and so we were here for her job transfer, and I started trying to figure out who could be like a center of influence that, I could start to develop. And I kind of stumbled into bookkeepers and a few accountants, CPAs. And what I found is a lot of them have clients who have not done any retirement planning.
Mm.
And a lot of business owners, they have an idea and they try to go do it. But just because you're a roofer doesn't mean you're good at keeping books, right? Or just because you bake cupcakes and decorate them doesn't mean that you're good at payroll or some of those things, right? But what happens a lot is a lot of business owners, I don't know that it's consciously necessarily, but they have this idea they're going to build this business over the years. It's going to get big. We're going to sell it for millions of dollars, and then I'm going to go, sip margaritas on the beach or whatever. But there's a lot of problems with that, and your businesses a lot of times aren't valued at what you think they are, because a buyer doesn't care about the birthdays you missed. They don't care about the 20-hour days, right? They're looking at revenue and those kinds of things.
So I often call financial advisors, but I think every business owner, they're all accidental business owners because we don't
Right?
understand. They're like you just mentioned, a lot of individuals that are passionate about the craft, but there are
Yes.
two sides of the business. There is that, being passionate about that, and then there is the side of business, like you said, the numbers,
Right.
accounting, and some of these things. And those are the things that nobody's passionate about. Even going out there and
Right.
making sales, that's all part of business, but you just want
Yeah.
to go out there and do the advising or, do the
Right.
baking of the cupcakes and doing all of that stuff. And it's like, no, you got to have both of those together.
Right. Which you absolutely should. Right. And
Yeah.
so I think, having professionals, that, there's some professions that, need to have lawyers on retainer, for different things, whatever other professionals, excuse me, some need more than maybe a bookkeeper. They need
Yeah.
a certified tax professional as things, come up and how big they are and where they do business and that kind of thing. Uh, and so I think that it's, in dealing with a lot of these business owners, on small business owners, a lot of them think that they're going to sell a business into retirement, and there's a lot of things that they don't think about that could be really big obstacles with them. Whereas, if you do something while you're building the business to work towards your retirement, if you do sell that business for millions, then that becomes part of your retirement plan. But one thing, is I mentioned, coming into the industry in 2000, the dot-com bubble burst, and you know the floor fell out and everything went crazy. And then in 2008, 2009, everything, the bottom dropped out, everything went crazy. And then we had COVID, and we saw a lot of people, especially in the 2008, 2009 era, that kind of panicked and sold off a lot of their stuff as they were close to retirement, and then they had to go get maybe another job, or just personally, I saw a lot of older people working at Walmart as a greeter that
Yeah.
you're thinking, of course you don't know everything, but you kind of look like your retirement age. And you hear a lot of stories of people that, you know, they sold, or they, whatever happened, they got out of positions, and the market, came back, and they didn't benefit from that. And then you had COVID that shut down a lot of stuff. Small businesses, had to shut down and things like that. So you can't always, we're not going to be able to control the environment of what something might look like into the future, right? You and I could build a really tremendous business as an entrepreneur, but if we need to go sell it and it's August 2020 and the COVID, pandemic is raging, we may not have the luxury of waiting that out for a few years. So I think that's kind of important, that you know, who is an ideal client. Small business owners are definitely people I really like to enjoy. And then just people that don't know what to do, that just need some education. They need to learn about how money works and how to kind of figure things out so that they can understand. And then, if that is beneficial to them, then we're able to pop the hood and help them, try to do things in place. And it's not always doing something radical or new. Sometimes it's just reallocating how you're doing things.
Yeah. No, you bring a great point. Yeah, I mean, there isn't. I always tell people when it comes to finances, there isn't the right way or the perfect way. There is the way that works for you, and I think it all has to be customized and it all has to be based on your current situation, what you have, and also where you want to be. Because some people might want to travel around the world, and there are some people I know. When I was an advisor, there was somebody that was like. I think he was a teacher or I can't remember what profession he was, but he's like, hey, listen, I just want to sit there and watch the game because I always missed it, and it's kind of like everybody's
Right.
got their different ways, and the way you get there is going to be different from person to person, right?
Absolutely. And I think, part of the problem too is that people have stopped dreaming.
Mm,
Things have gotten so tough, and this isn't a political thing, but just a lot of things have changed. And when you have hurricanes and different things that hit different parts of the world, but let's say the United States specifically, and building material prices go up,
yeah,
and different things like that, is just stuff has gotten more and more expensive in the last even 10 years. Things have gone up. I remember being a kid and going to the store, and you could buy four candy bars. You could get specifically Butterfinger and Baby Ruth, and they were near the checkout. You could get four for $1. I remember buying nickel dime candy at the drugstore, and things have just gone up, and there's been massive layoffs. You've seen tech companies lay a lot of people off, things that have been traditionally high paying jobs and things like that, and housing and all of these things. And so I think a lot of people stop dreaming about how good their life could be or how they want it to
mm,
look. And so part of the problem is it's hard to plan for your retirement if you don't have a good idea of what that looks like.
yeah,
The person that wants to travel the world is going to have more resources
yeah,
than the person that just wants to sit and watch the game. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you kind of have to have an idea of what you want that to look like and the things that you may want to do, and house and family considerations and all of that, and your health and everything. So those are important things.
yeah. No, no, you do bring out a great point. Well, this has been an awesome conversation, and as we're closing in here, I've got what I call these rapid fire questions. The
All right.
first one is, what's your favorite book that you swear by?
I'm going to say 10x is easier than 2x. I listened to it on Audible. Just finished it about 6 weeks ago, and I love it.
Yeah, it's a great book. I've listened to it too. I didn't read it. I listened to a lot of books.
Yeah.
What's a morning habit or a daily routine that you do?
One of the things I do is I have a pair of dice, and when I wake up, usually before I go use the bathroom or pray or anything like that, I roll the first die to see if it's an odd or an even number, and then I roll the second die to get a number 1 through 6. And I started this a couple of years ago. I call it what's my focus word, and
Mm,
I've got 12 words total, so my odds and my evens. And today, the word that I rolled is still. And so
mm,
throughout the day, I'm trying to focus on not getting agitated, being a little more thoughtful, just kind of being still. I'm still going to go to the gym, and move and that kind of thing, because
mm.
move is one of my words, but resolve, pivot, being aware. So I've got these words I do. I like to do that and have kind of a focus for my day that I later record in my journal at night.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, again, it's all about being intentional about everything you're doing. And that's important, especially around finances, but in all of our areas of life, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. What's one
right,
bucket
right.
list? What's one bucket list item that you haven't done yet?
Um, I got to go to Spain for the first time last year,
Mm.
and I had wanted to go there for over 30 years, and I loved it. I would love to have about a month to just go through
Well,
Italy and Spain and Portugal without any kind of plan and just kind of go and experience that and then move on to the next city and spend about a month just getting immersed in the food and culture.
no, that sounds really interesting. I love Europe. I'm originally from Europe. I was born in Czechoslovakia, so
Oh,
I
nice.
have not gone to that side of it because whenever I go to Europe, I kind of go back home. But that sounds really
Right.
interesting. But I've had several trips where like I just kind of went down there. I showed up and I didn't do anything, no plans or nothing. Life kind of
Yeah.
happened, and it's a great way of doing that. So
Yeah, for sure.
that's a good one. What's a surprising hobby or interest that recharges you?
I've been mountain biking for over 30 years. And then ironically, I moved to Houston almost a year ago and it's really flat,
Well,
which, is terrible. But I still ride my mountain bike. I've got over 50 miles of paved trail here
mm,
in my town. And so I love biking because it's a great time to listen to Audible.
mm.
That's how I listen to Atomic Habits 2 or 3 times. Gives me time to be around nature, breathe fresh air, get some exercise. So, barring any major accident or injury, I expect that I'll be able to do that for the next, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah, biking is certainly a little bit easier. I love walking. I do go running in
Yeah,
the mornings too,
yeah,
but walking it's another way of doing that. But yeah, I also ride the
absolutely.
bike and it's a good time off. Well, you know what? We're down to the
Yeah.
last question. I call it the hot one.
Okay.
Fast forward to the end of your life and imagine that everyone that you've ever known and you ever told them anything have forgotten everything that you ever told them or taught them. But they do have the opportunity to remember one last message from you. What would you want that message to be?
Wow, that is a great question. Um, I think I would just say chase happiness, chase
Mm,
the things that make you happy. Something that I started about 12 years ago is I was kind of having a rough time, so I was trying to challenge myself and find the 200 best experiences of my life.
mm,
And I put these in front of every new journal. And I've given my daughter instructions that I want those read at my memorial
mm,
service. But they are things like touring an aircraft carrier, going to Alcatraz, riding
mm.
a bike. You mentioned the Golden Gate Bridge, riding my bike against the Golden Gate Bridge, seeing the space shuttle shoot across the sky years ago, my children being born, all of one on one with friends, things like that. I think my message would be just go experience as much of life as you can, get out of your comfort zone because life doesn't start until you get out of your comfort zone.
Mm.
And the farther you get out of center comfort, the more enriching and rewarding life you're going to have.
Yeah. Wow. You just started something we could have go and have another whole conversation on. There was a movie, Peaceful Warrior. I don't know if you ever seen it, but being in that moment,
I
one of my
haven't.
favorite movies. Wow. What a powerful and perspective shifting conversation, Steve. Thank you for sharing your journey and
Oh,
we'll be on here. Where can people find out a little bit more about you and your work that you do?
yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, and my website is wealthwave.com/Steve Smith.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put all of that stuff in the show notes so people are going to be able to go in there. So if you're listening, be sure to connect with Steve and tap into his teachings and the perspective shifting conversations that he's able to have with you to kind of really having you and help you having a meaningful financial future. Steve, thank you again for your time and your message. And remember, making life less taxing isn't just about money. It's about freedom, clarity, and purpose. Keep building wealth, keep protecting your legacy, and keep living the untaxable lifestyle. We'll see you next time on the Make Life Less Taxing podcast. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Make Life Less Taxing podcast. Be sure to check out our other top advisor interviews at makelifelsesstaxingpodcast.com.